In 1959, 9 experienced hikers ventured into the Ural Mountains. None of them returned alive. Their bodies were found under bizarre circumstances: ripped tents, missing tongues, and radiation on their clothes. What really happened on Dyatlov Pass? A partially collapsed tent sits in the foreground, lightly dusted with snow, its entrance slightly open as if hurriedly abandoned. Footprints trail away into the distance, disappearing into the mist. Nearby, human figures rest peacefully in the snow, their expressions calm yet enigmatic. A soft, ethereal glow subtly illuminates their clothing, hinting at an unexplained presence. The scene is tranquil yet eerie, with a muted color palette of blues and whites, evoking a sense of mystery and the unknown. On February 1961, 9 experienced hikers, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, set out to explore the northern slopes of Otorten Mountain in northwest Russia. Their plan was to study the area's glaciers and collect rock samples for analysis. They packed their Soviet-made gear, food, extra clothing, and even an accordion. Then they set off into the Ural wilderness. At the time, the group was part of the Northern Search and Rescue Squad based in the nearby town of Berezniki. They trained regularly and had extensive experience in the Ural Mountains, which were popular with hikers and skiers. This time, though, things would be very different. By January, the hikers had reached their base camp near the summit of Otorten. There they pitched their tent and settled in for the night. In the morning, they continued on to a spot known as the Pass of the Dead Man's Beard. This was the highest point of their expedition, reaching over 10,000 feet or 3,000 meters. So far, so good. But when search teams later examined the hikers' belongings, they found something strange. All of the ropes securing the tent to its poles were cut, suggesting that the hikers had fled in a hurry. But why, and where could they have gone? As it turned out, they'd left behind more than just their tent. The hikers had abandoned their supplies, some of their clothing, and even their ski boots. It was as if they'd been planning to come back. But what could have made them change their minds? Strangely, none of the food that they'd brought with them was touched, which ruled out the possibility that they'd run out of supplies. They also didn't appear to be injured or exhausted, suggesting that they hadn't been overwhelmed by the elements or forced to make a hasty retreat from a wild animal. Even stranger, the temperature at the time was well above freezing, meaning that there was no risk of hypothermia. But the hikers seemed to have panicked anyway. They must have been scared of something, but what? Some believed that they'd been menaced by a rare beast known locally as the man-eater of the Urals. Legends speak of a large, hairy creature with glowing red eyes that haunts these very mountains. But this doesn't explain why the hikers cut the ropes securing their tent. Could they have been trying to escape the man-eater's clutches? Others suggested that the hikers had instead encountered a group of hungry wolves, which would explain why they ran away from their tent. But strangely, wolf attacks were actually quite rare in the Urals, and there was no evidence that any wild animals had been disturbed at the site. Besides, if the hikers had been attacked, it's unlikely that they would have abandoned their supplies, not to mention their ski boots, which would have been useful for escaping through the snow. What's more, footprints found at the scene did not match those of wolves, nor did they match those of any other animals. With no sign of struggle or predators, it seemed likely that the hikers had fled on foot into the night. But what could have possibly scared them so much? In 2019, a team of scientists came up with another theory. They hypothesized that the hikers had been caught in a sudden avalanche and realized that they were in danger of being buried alive. In a panic, they fled to higher ground, only to become lost and freeze to death. This would explain why they abandoned their gear, including their ski boots, as well as why they didn't huddle together for warmth. According to the scientists, they likely succumbed to hypothermia within 2 hours, which would have been almost instantaneous in the freezing temperatures. It seems like a plausible explanation. After all, avalanches are common in the Urals and they can strike without warning. What's more, the hikers were found lying in a spot known as the Corridor of Death, which is particularly prone to avalanches. What's more, several of the hikers had trace amounts of a chemical compound called glycerol in their systems, which is produced when the body freezes. But this doesn't account for one crucial piece of evidence. When search teams arrived at the scene, they found the tent had been ripped open from the inside. If the hikers had been caught in an avalanche, it would have been ripped open from the outside. And there was no evidence of one at all. So what really happened to the Dyatlov hikers? In the end, their deaths remain a mystery. But one thing's for sure, you won't catch me hiking in the Urals anytime soon. For more chilling tales of survival gone wrong, stay tuned. And as always, thanks for watching. On February 1961, 9 experienced hikers led by 30-year-old Igor Dyatlov set out to climb Otorten, a 1,600-meter peak in northwest Russia's northern Ural Mountains. The group was well prepared with plenty of food and warm clothing, and even an extra tent. They planned to hike for 2 weeks before returning to their base camp. But something went terribly wrong. On February, a search team found their abandoned campsite at the foot of Mount Otorten. All of their gear was there except for their footwear, which was strewn about the site. Most strangely of all, the tent had been torn open from the inside and the hikers had fled into the freezing night, some without shirts or underwear. What had caused them to abandon their camp in such a panic? And what happened to them in the freezing cold? All we know comes from the investigation files, which contain some truly bizarre details. Here's the terrifying true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. In the days leading up to the incident, the weather forecast called for heavy snow and strong winds, but it was not due to arrive until February. So the group decided to make an early start and set up camp on the evening of the 2nd, even though they had not yet reached their planned route. It was not unusual for experienced hikers to take risks like this. In fact, Dyatlov had deliberately chosen a remote area because he wanted to test his group's limits. The following morning, the hikers set off in good spirits, leaving their extra tent and most of their supplies at the main camp. They intended to trek for 5 days before returning to pick up their things. As the weather was unseasonably warm, they did not bother to dig a snow trench around their tent and so were exposed to the elements. In the early hours of February, an investigator would later find the tent half submerged in snow, ripped open as if from the inside. There was no sign of a struggle, however, and no footprints in the surrounding area. When the investigators returned to the tent the following day, they found 9 sets of footprints leading away from the camp in the direction of a nearby river. The prints showed that all 9 hikers had been wearing their skiing boots, but none of them were properly laced up. Most disturbingly, several of the bodies that were recovered later had no clothing on their lower half. Some of the bodies also lacked shirts or underwear. The hikers seemed to have been in a terrible hurry as they fled their camp in the night, though exactly why remains unknown. After a few days, the searchers found the bodies of 2 of the hikers, Lyudmila Dubinina and Yuri Krivonashenko, near the tent. Their clothes were torn and their ski boots were missing. The remaining 7 bodies were discovered over the next few months. Some were found on the slopes of Mount Otorten, while others were located further away from the mountain, suggesting that some of the hikers had managed to walk several kilometers in the freezing temperatures before succumbing to hypothermia. To this day, it remains a mystery how the hikers died. According to the official investigation, which was reopened in 1990, the most likely cause was an avalanche that collapsed the tent and caused the hikers to flee in their underwear. However, the lead investigator, Lev Zolotarev, believed that this theory was flawed because an avalanche would have killed all 9 instantly and dismembered their bodies, which would have been found far away from each other. Instead, evidence suggests that they had wandered around in a confused state for some time before collapsing. Other theories suggest that the hikers panicked after seeing a bear in their tent or that they were attacked by wolves. However, there is no evidence to support either claim. Perhaps the most intriguing theory is that the hikers experienced a form of mass hysteria, known as a panic attack, which can cause people to flee in terror without any rational explanation. Some researchers believe that this could have been triggered by a combination of exhaustion, hunger, and stress, which would explain why the bodies were found without their lower clothing. What's your theory on what happened to the Dyatlov group? Let us know in the comments below. And in the meantime, be sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching.